It's 1989. You are playing the greatest video game machine concocted by mankind, the Nintendo Entertainment System. But then, you see a commercial from some obscure company saying that they have a better console than your childhood wonder. Sega had designed a video game system that was slated to go up against the gaming console giants Nintendo, and they were fully aware of it. This was the beginning of a rivalry that would continue for 10 years. Welcome back, my fellow creators, to Adventure Gaming, and this is how Sonic almost defeated Mario. Just cut off the camera so we can get this over and done with. I don't want to have to work with this guy. First, let's take a look at what the Sega Genesis, or Mega Drive, had over its competitor. Well, the console uses something known as 16-bit technology. Now, I don't want to get too nerdy with all this, because I don't even know what it means, and you know what? I bet you don't either. What it meant is that the Sega Genesis had much better graphics than the NES, which only used 8-bit technology. It had more colors, more details, more frames, and basically just an overall better screen environment. And this was great for classic gamers who used to spend hours in the arcade, putting quarter after quarter into the machines. They can now play these games right in their living room. It was like a dream come true. When Sega said they had what Nintendo don't, it was true. The NES could not display this kind of graphical capability on a screen. It wasn't technologically feasible. But it wasn't just graphics that were improved, but mechanics too. Because of this new 16-bit processor, the game now had a much larger scale with the new cartridges, and they were now able to add more enemies, power-ups, and places to go. And with all this new stuff to do, it made the world in the game feel massive with endless exploration and fun, giving it a new flavor and a big refresher for gamers. And this was Sega's first step into topping Nintendo in home consoles. So Sega have proven that they can build the video game machine of the future, but do they have any good games to back it up? See, Nintendo wasn't only known for their technological innovation, but more for their amazing, charming games. Like, for example, Mario! A red-wearing Italian plumber with a thick accent who would fight off strange creatures to rescue Princess Toadstool from Bowser, the King of Koopa. Sega made many different designs for a mascot of their own, until Yuji Naka and Naoto Oshima created a blue hedgehog who had the ability of super speed. His name was Sonic. He had the same traits as Mario in fighting off a nefarious villain, but this time, he was as fast as the speed of light, and he had a great cocky attitude, which was better for the teenage audiences that Sega were targeting, rather than the little kid audiences like Nintendo were mostly targeting. Sega had sold 500,000 Genesises in 1989. Not nearly as many as the NES, but I'm sure it'll get there in no time. But we all know that Nintendo was not going to take this disrespect. They had to fight back. They had to do something that made them this successful in the first place. Introducing the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. An NES that has been enhanced to the same 16-bit graphics as the Genesis. It's over. The Nintendo slogan doesn't work anymore. And Sega knew this was going to be a challenge because Nintendo was a much more well-known brand with a larger budget for advertising. How is Sega going to continue expanding the sales of their console? Well, how about they just do what they did before? Find something about Nintendo that is inherently worse than their console and exploit it. Introducing Sega's next move, blast processing. Now this is where things are going to get a bit technical again, but that's okay because I bet you're going to watch it, because if you don't watch it, I'm going to come round your house. And trust me, you don't want that. Consoles and computers in general have a thing called a CPU. This thing is like the core of the machine. It controls everything, including how fast the machine can compute. So therefore, in your console, depending on how fast the CPU is, this will determine the speed and rate that your games can be played at. Now, the Super Nintendo's CPU clocked in at 1.79 to 2.68 megahertz, whereas the Genesis clocked in at 7.6 megahertz. This meant that the Genesis could run games at a much faster pace, which made for very high speed and fun experiences. This was perfect for franchises like the Sonic games, which had great speed and thrill, which was another factor that was perfect for the audience that Sega were targeting. Some critics described it as being on a roller coaster in a theme park, with all the loops and tracks that you can go down with great speed. So Sega started ripping into Nintendo again in their advertising, saying that they didn't have blast processing.
The Sega Genesis has blast processing. Super Nintendo doesn't. So what's blast processing do? And what if you don't have blast processing?
So it is now the end of the 16-bit console generation. Let's tally up the sales and see who got the most. Sega Genesis had sold 30 million units worldwide, the most they've ever sold in history. But what about the Super Nintendo? Surely Sega must have beat them with all the advertising and better specs than the... Oh. Unfortunately, reality is reality. Nintendo have really cemented themselves as the bosses of the console market. But not just consoles, they had great focus with games. Yes, Sega also had a ton of good games, but not nearly as many as Nintendo. Another factor could be that Sega just never really cracked the American market the way Nintendo did. But I think the biggest factor is that by the end of this generation, Sega started delivering too many mediocre products that kind of bogged them down a bit. They would continue to innovate and always beat Nintendo to the crunch with the latest, hottest technology. But it still wasn't enough when you didn't have anything good to deliver these products through. But to give them credit, Nintendo probably would not have done as well as they did without this random competitor going in so hard into giving them a challenge. Like I said, Sega's focus just wasn't in the right place, as was with Nintendo. But as the console wars evolved, more and more competition would crop up, which would take a toll on both companies, until 11 years after the Genesis's release, Sega would be defeated once and for all.
Not by Nintendo, but by the rivals towering over both of them.